anybody there?
There it goes. I had to restart.
Okay, no worries. Hey, David, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. I'm super excited to get to learn a bit more about you and your latest work, but how's everything going over there on your side of the world?
Well, weather-wise, we're heating up. I'm in the Valley, San Fernando Valley, in the Valley in California. So, we're 20 degrees hotter than everybody outside the Valley right now.
So has that been home for you, sort of that area, always been your neck of the woods?
It hasn't. I've been here for about 8 years. I was kind of a bit of a nomad in my creative life. I was born and raised in Oklahoma City and made my way down to San Antonio to open a comic book store of all things back in the early 90s. And I had started a theater company there. That's a whole other story.
Oh, I love that.
And we moved to Chicago, and we were young and thought we'd give it a shot, and moved to Chicago. And after a few years, we actually broke through and ended up on a best of decade list. 7 years after the fact. So it's weird that you make a list long after you've left theater. But and then I got involved in indie film, and eventually made my way out to California. Originally Venice Beach. I moved out here, so I was living close to the ocean, which was fantastic after having lived in the Midwest for most of my life.
Yeah. So it seems like you've been able to take on a variety of different creative forms. Has it always been writing at the core of that, or did you find writing later in sort of your creative introspection?
No, you're right. It's always been writing. I was interested in writing even in grade school. In 8th grade, and in my creative writing class, I wrote a 100-page sequel to The Hobbit.
Nice.
And I was always interested in that. I don't know what it is. I got into, role-playing games early on, like you did at that, period, Dungeons and Dragons, all the other ones, and which is just about, writing scenarios and problem solving, which is really what writing is. And so at the core, it's always been writing. I did some acting in high school, but decided that I did not want to pursue that in college. So I thought I'd take the easier route by pursuing writing. The belief being that, I'm sure I will marry a career woman and I can write anywhere and, in my underwear. And that seemed like a big plus as opposed to getting out of the house and auditioning. So I went that route, and I, in the writing career, I've written in different mediums, and I've always kind of pivoted. And part of that was following opportunities and successes, because you just really don't know what's going to take traction. And I was never afraid to follow opportunities and, learn more about the craft, because every medium has a different set of rules and a different sensibility. And it also helped me keep from getting burned out.
Oh, okay. I see. So I imagine that you were juggling a variety of different forms of projects at the same time then, from the time you were younger, or?
Oh, not necessarily at the same time. It was a lot of pivoting with some overlap. I had in college, instead of theater, I got my degree in writing, but I wrote my first two novels while I was in college, which is daunting. And they don't tell you when you're studying writing that you will have homework for the rest of your life, and you will have homework on evenings and weekends for the rest of your life. And that's something you realize later, and you're like, oh, right, I need to learn about this. I need to learn about that. And, but it's great. It keeps the brain active. And, they say that that's one of the things, like, writers and historians and philosophers, are able to keep learning new skills because the brains are so active.
Right.
And they don't get locked in. And it's the reason why Michael Jordan can't hit a baseball, right? He just started baseball too late in his career.
Yeah.
To learn that skill set.
So the basic impulse is still kind of putting stuff on the page, and then there is an opportunity to branch out and use that initial, I guess, training in the written word in every single facet that you can, right?
Absolutely. Like I said, I'd started off writing novels. I was fortunate or unfortunate enough to land at a big agency right out of college. And I thought, well, this is it. I'm going to write career thrillers the rest of my life. You'll find me at the airport bookstore. And I had a junior agent, and that lasted a couple of years and got really frustrating. And I happened to work overnight at Kinko's, which, some of your younger viewers may not know what that is, but it's the 24-hour copy store.
Yeah, I was there after the rebranding, just to date myself as well.
FedEx Office?
Yeah.
Yeah, what used to be FedEx Kinko's, and then they got rid of that and it became
right.
just FedEx. But I was fortunate working the overnight that I met so many creatives, because you would have all the musicians would come in there, the sushi chefs would come in there, the pizza guys would come in there. So I was always well fed. They'd get a little, employee discount.
Yeah.
All the artists came in. I'm surprised I didn't get fired. I have artwork on my walls that, hey, I don't have money for, these 100 flyers for my show, but I brought you this painting. And I'm like, all right,
we'll make it work.
We'll make it work. And, just did, trying to do my best to help out the arts. But I met a young theater director in college, and we kind of hit it off, and because it's a little bit more leisurely late at night, and chatted, and he was like, hey, have you ever thought about writing a play? And I was like, well, I did theater in high school, and that's 90 pages as opposed to 400 pages, so that sounds actually kind of interesting. So I kind of self-taught. I read a bunch of plays and looked at structure and bought some books, and long story short, I finished a script. We did a staged reading of it. I got some great feedback from some professionals in the area that had moved back there from Chicago. And I used to drive a 67 Cadillac sedan DeVille. So 4-door, huge boat, 10 miles a gallon. And a drunk college student backed into side door and didn't want a cop report, didn't want anything.
Oh.
So he paid me cash, and I used that cash to produce my first play. And
talk about bootstrapping, right?
I drove around with a dented door on the side for this 50-foot long car, and I really got the bug. It was great at that time, actually working with people and relearning how to do theater. And the play was, I won't say modest success, but it was success. We got a great review. We had good audiences. We had people coming back to see it multiple times, which was great. And then our next play that we put up the next year won some shiny things, and we're like, hey, we're ready to take on the world, right? So we loaded up the truck and moved to Chicago.
Oh, wow.
So for the next several years, I concentrated on playwriting and eventually producing as well.
That's amazing. So can we talk about what that play was about that really gave you the spark, the one that you paid with the dented door?
Oh my God. It was called Killing Lucifer, and it was about a man who hits a bad streak in his life, and he blames it on an encounter he had on stage with another actor where he kind of slips into a hallucinatory fit, but he believes that this young man is, Lucifer is Satan, and that if he kills this guy, things will be made right. And, he tracks down the guy, and they agree to meet at a bar, and the main character deals with these other patrons, and it slips in and out of flashbacks. The hooker is his daughter that had died, and there's a salesman who plays different parts, and there's a gun dealer that he goes there to meet to buy the gun from. So you have double roles, and kind of flows in and out. And I was fortunate enough that the director, who's a college student at the time, took the play to his college professor, who was like, oh, I can't, all right, I'll read this manifesto from some guy that works at Kinko's. And then he read it, and he called me. He's like, I want to do this.
Wow. And
so we had a professional actor in the lead, and managed to find some hobbyists and some younger college students to do it, and pulled it off. And I got the bug. I really got the bug. It was really, because as a novelist, you're not hearing people read your work. Right. I mean, now audiobooks are all the rage, but at that time it was just great going like, wow, I didn't envision the character doing that, but that makes sense. And, it's like, well, it's all on the page. It's all here. Now that play, I think, was overwritten. I think it was a little bit more literary. And then the next play was, much more play-like and a lot more subtext. And that it actually went on to, getting an option and made as a movie. So,
oh wow, that's
so
great.
Yeah, so theater led to a film, morass, as I like to say, and then pivoted back to writing novels eventually.
Yeah, it strikes me as maybe you having an affinity for the mechanisms of stories in a way, as being as somebody who comes from that kind of role playing inspiration of board games, as well as the literary aspects of it. Did you feel like you internalized the mechanics of storytelling, or do you feel like initially you were coming from a more organic place when you were putting some of these things together?
Well, my first attempt at a novel was crap, and I was told as such. So I had to learn. But even, learning, because my undergrad was Pulp Fiction school, basically. Like, every chapter's got a hook, a character's got a goal.
I see.
Goal, conflict, disaster, quandary, action, decision,
Yeah.
goal again.
So very well suited to screenwriting and that sort of more.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you though, when you're young, you're like, oh, that's formulaic and it's too, on the nose and it's too whatever. So you have a tendency to start writing stuff that's withholding a little bit, right? You actually want to make, you actually tend to write more of a mystery piece that's not like what happens next, but what's going on here. And an audience can only take what's going on here too long before they check out. But if they're invested in, a character with a goal, and, I had one play where the guy just originally wanted to get a light for a cigarette. And that's the first 10 minutes of the play, but he's trying to use that to get inside of this apartment. Right. And so, the goal, and it doesn't matter, like, oh, it's important to him. He gets a light and I'm going to see if he gets it. Does he do it? Yes or no? So I think I would have had a little bit more success earlier on had I embraced that. And it wasn't until, I think my second play, Hard Scrambled, that I really embraced that. And I certainly embraced it in the screenwriting version of it. And, and then that's what kind of jump-started some things. But you can learn the craft and structure, and that will carry you more than almost anything other than tenacity.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you can combine craft and tenacity with, insight and, inspiration and really working, to maybe make something elegant. My wife is a screenwriter. And we always talk about, to really get noticed, you have to write something that's singular and undeniable, but at the same time, you're dealing with industries that don't want something that's singular and undeniable. They want something that's close to or the same as sort of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
It's this meets this, right? The usual saying, right? Jaws meets Men in Black, or Jaws meets The Matrix. With goblins.
That used to be a way to pitch things, and then that fell out of favor, and now it's back. And NSFW, my latest book, I pitched as The Office meets A Clockwork Orange. Now, The Office is not a book. Clockwork Orange is a movie based on a book that most people have not read, but they know is kind of edgy. So even with books, the comps you use to sell something, you end up pulling something that's more known to the general populace, right?
Yeah, yeah. And you just reminded me of this because we're reading Wrinkle in Time with my son. We just actually wrapped it up yesterday, and Madeleine L'Engle said this really amazing thing that kind of stuck with me. It was just this idea that life is a sonnet, and sure, there's peculiar patterns that you have to follow, the meter, right, of a sonnet and things like that, but you have room between the lines to really imbue with your own thing. And I feel like it's such a concise way of articulating, sure, it's a life thing, right? But also just the mechanics of something is so important. And I feel like, me personally, maybe I'm speaking from personal experience, it's so difficult to have the humility sometimes when you're that young to just say, I need to do it this way. I need to accept that there are forms that can be followed and that will allow you to do something that's bigger than you in a way.
Yes. And I think also when you're younger, you want to be that 1% that it is effortless. Like, I'm going to sit down and write it my way, and I'm going to break all these rules, and it's going to be effortless, and people will praise me. And they're just like, yeah, I'm at sea in the story. I don't know what's going on. You're like, but I learned in all these things. And you're like, yeah. And it's just, I don't get it.
It's just learning to speak that language, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. But I tell you, there's, the difference. I always said this regarding playwriting and screenwriting. Screenwriting is math and playwriting is jazz. You can go off in a playwriting and, then come back to the main theme and then go off with these grace notes. And screenwriting's got to be tight because there's so much money spent, on the page per page. that it's got to be, it's got to make sense. And you also have to learn the structure because, the first time I was like, well, okay, Hard Scrambled was written, more of an indie structure because it was based on a play. So it's, this scene builds on this scene, builds on this scene. Mm-hmm. And I was commissioned to write a thriller, or a friend had commissioned somebody else to write a screenplay and it wasn't going well. And I kind of was in semi-retirement at that time, taking some time away from writing. And I just started spitballing ideas with him. And he's like, do you want to write this? And I was like, dude, I'm taking the year off. And he's like, yeah, but I can pay you and I got a producer. And I was like, all right, let me see how thrillers are written. And I took that basic structure and that actually being really comforting, knowing that like, okay, I need to aim towards these beats. At the same time, I can use my playwriting skill to write this neo-noir dialogue, right? And embracing that. And then I had people read it and it did really well. It placed, in the top 10 in a number of big contests. But the biggest thing I got back was like, oh, it reads like a movie. It reads like a movie. And you start understanding like, oh, right, because you have an internal rhythm reading a movie and it needs to hit this beat. That's always they say if something's off beat, you're not hitting those points. Yeah. You're hitting them either early or later. So, so it certainly helps. But I think it took a long time to get to that point to be able to embrace structure because you always feel like, you're doing something that's been done before. But I finally started embracing the house metaphor. Yeah. Like every house needs walls. Every house needs a roof. It depends on the style. How are you going to decorate the inside? What's the character of the house, right? Yeah. But it still has to serve as shelter, right? Yeah. And is it a cookie cutter or is it is it an architecture's life dream? And so once you start embracing, like I have some constraints I'm going to play within, but I can do, all my subversive stuff within that structure. Right. Then it was very freeing, but it took me a long time to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like there was just a lot of honesty with yourself about this is what I can do right now. This is what I'm capable of doing. Or is it just very much going by feeling here and saying like trial and error, learning from people? Because this is not something that you can do on your own, right? I mean, you got to be receptive to that feedback and you got to be open or at least have a community of collaborators that kind of guides you in certain ways because it can't be done on your own, right?
It's hard to. And, if you're going off and just writing novel after novel without any feedback other than, form rejection letters, you're not going to grow. And that's one thing I've noticed with a lot of younger writers, like they're not investing in learning the craft, right? They're not reading nonfiction. They're not learning, certain structure. What they're doing is they're basing their stories on, movies they've already seen, TV shows they've already seen. And I've read so many short stories that, read like the opening teaser scene of a horror movie, right? Which is like, it's all built up to this moment, which should lead into a bigger story, but then the story stops. And I am, I'm devoted to the craft of, I'm a member of the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers Association and I mentor with them, but also I participated in their silent auction and I got 2 career guidance sessions and 2 manuscript critiques. So I had Alina Don Johnson had read YA thing I'd been working on for a long time. And I got great feedback from her because I'm just not as familiar with that world and the business as it is today. Yeah. And I got amazing high level notes. And I'm like, oh, this is going to serve me well the rest of my career. And then I talked with AC Weiss, who wrote Wendy Darling and has a collection out, I believe called The Ghost Sequences. And she'd read the new adult book I'm working on. And she was like, yeah, just make sure you do that. You're on track, watch out for these pitfalls with historical fiction, do this. And maybe a little bit more sensory input. And I'm like, oh, you're right. Because I'm still, coming from screenwriting where you write what you can see and hear, right? Yeah. But like taste and smells and, tactile is something that still needs to be, presented in a book as well as the internal life. Yeah. So, it was just like, one was like, yeah, keep doing what you're doing, watch for these pitfalls. Another was like, here's where you need to change. Here's what you need to keep in mind going forward. Everything's there, but you need to watch these pitfalls. And that was great. But I know some people just aren't interested in still learning, right?
Yeah. And I do think that maybe it's the pace of social media. And I mean, I follow Twitter voraciously, and I
Mhm.
that's really where a majority of some of my guests, at the beginning of the podcast came from. And I noticed that there's an upswell of younger writers who are, they got their second, third novel, early 20s. And I don't know if it's a detriment to them to get their work out so soon. How does this work, or is this an issue at all?
I know I would say to any younger writers, because you can Zoom now and you can do things without leaving your house, that you still need to network. And for me, I think the one thing I would have done differently is finding a mentor. I've mentored a number of people now, and I'm a mentor with the SFWA. And if I can save somebody a few years on getting published, or point out something like Alina did with me with my YA book, which I come to find out is more middle grade, which I'm like, okay, there's certain things that need to be changed. I'm like, great. Because, I think, you and I, like, we would read, The Great Brain or Mad Scientist Club and these things. And then once you hit sixth grade, you made the jump to Tolkien or Anne McCaffrey or these thick fantasy books. There was no kind of easing in a YA. Like you were reading, like, I guess they called like young, I forget what the name is, but you had, Where the Red Fern Grows and Badge of Honor and The Outsiders, these kind of teen books. But then you jump to, like, reading trilogies and, this epic. So, and I think, Harry Potter kind of changed that, for better or for worse. But, I forget what the original question was.
But I think you cover it well. I mean, in terms of the answer of mentorship, I think is pivotal.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I feel like, for some of us maybe who are long distance everything, me over here in Wyoming, it's really nice to generate connections and get to connect with people in a certain way. And it's opened things up for, at least online, for folks who are in more rural communities or out there communities. So you find your people, right? But I think that there is something to be said about gathering the skills to connect in person as an artist, as a storyteller, whatever that may be, so that you're actually internalizing things to greater effect. But yeah, mentorship, I do agree, is probably the pivotal thing that's missing.
It really is, especially, like I said, I came from Oklahoma, where for better or for worse, I knew in 8th grade I was going to have to leave because I was interested in film and storytelling, and there was nothing to support that. And I knew one day I would eventually end up in California. I just ended up taking Chicago as a as a long way station. But that's, Mamet talks about, the best thing you can do is get your work in front of an audience, and that's what we did. And I tell you, my craft accelerated because you learn really quickly what works in front of a live audience.
Yeah.
Because they will tell you what is working and what doesn't.
Yeah.
And a lot of those skills still translate, storytelling still translate to, novels and, just storytelling in general. But the mentorship and the community is great. I feel like I've been an emerging writer for 25 years, right? Like we all, you get your curse with just enough success to keep going, right? which is maddening, but that's the way of the world.
Yeah.
But at one point I decided I had written and directed Hard Scramble, the film, which is a fun little indie, a super low budget, but it's on Amazon Prime. Like eventually it ended up there somehow. Like, I don't know. They don't tell me. You just one day Google it and like, there it is. How about that? But I got tired of putting in the work and not getting any kind of reward. So I decided, I liked teaching, which come to find out I don't like teaching. I like mentoring, which are two completely different things. One, you have control under who you mentor, and teaching you don't. And I decided I want to get my MFA because I thought I would teach at some point, but I also wanted to join a process where if I did the work, I would be rewarded. And so I met a mentor there when I went back to writing novels. I applied under Stage and Screen because I figured if nothing else, I had a better shot at getting there. But I had a novel I'd been kind of working on in secret that nobody knew about, and that got me in. And so I took it with me, and that was going to be my master's thesis. And fast forward, that's my first small press book, and
this is The Fountain, right?
That's the fountain. Yeah.
Okay.
Look at you doing your
Well,
homework.
I
Yeah.
was making a couple of notes as quick as I could here. But before we get to the fountain, I wanted to ask you one last question about Hard Scrambled in terms of the collaboration of that process, or if you were fairly hands off. And then we can kind of take a deep dive into the fountain and, of course, NSFW.
Oh, sure. I'll talk about Hard Scramble. And for the longest, it was a blessing and a curse because, among, your peers that are trying to do indie films, there's only a few of you that actually get something across the finish line. Right. Mm-hmm. And then you're hoping that leads to the next project. And there's so many factors in there. Butterfly effect is in full effect. And, but no, I was very hands-on. I directed it.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah. They called and like, hey, congratulations. You've made the top 5 in our contest. Cause it was Creative Screenwriting Magazine, which is still kind of around in some form or fashion. And they were looking for a screenplay with limited locations, but no special effects. So I knew that ruled out a horror script.
Yeah.
Right. So there'd be no monsters, there'd be no blood and guts. So I was like, oh, they're looking for a play. So, I'd been working on Hard Scramble because I was going to do it indie style in Chicago with the actors. And so I got the call, they're going to make it. And of course they call and leave a message because I'm not home, I'm working. And so you get the message like, hey, this is Sussex, Creative Screenwriting, give us a call. And you're like, why are they calling? Why are they calling? Like the submission check cleared, right? I mean, the check didn't bounce. Why are they calling me? Why are they harassing me? Right. And then, you call them back and they're like, hey, we want to make your movie. And you're like the most incredulous, like, great, I am all right. And they're like, do you want to direct? And you had that moment of like, no, I don't want to direct. And then you're like, when is somebody going to ask me if I'm going to direct my own project? Like I am just as capable of screwing as somebody else. Right. But at least the decisions will be mine. And so I was walking on cloud 9 for weeks and then 9/11 happened.
Oh.
And everything got pushed for, and this is small potatoes compared to the, but still you're like, oh my God, like the butterfly effect, right? Like I did the work, I got in, I got this, I made it, they want to do it, they're going to fast track it, and 9/11 happens and all the money goes away, nobody knows what's going to happen. So eventually it got made, and I had some great actors. I had Kurtwood Smith from That 70s Show and RoboCop, and the dad was the lead, and
right.
I had an out-of-body experience on that movie. We're in the makeup trailer and he's getting his fake prison tats put on and he's telling me this RoboCop behind-the-scenes story.
Oh, man.
And I'm just like, I know who I was with and what movie theater I saw RoboCop in. I thought, this guy pops. He's popping off the screen.
Massive.
He's a great villain. And now he's telling me this behind-the-scenes story,
my goodness.
In a scene where I still quote it, with my friends every now and then, right? And it's just funny how, how things happen. But that was an amazing experience. And, eventually I spent a year on the B Film Festival circuit and, was a great experience. And then, you're trying to get the next one made and it's tough.
Yeah.
And eventually I moved out here and worked on some other projects before pivoting back to writing novels.
Okay. So you felt kind of after a while like this is something that I've put enough effort into, let's pivot again, or let's go back to the thing. I guess the well, right? Because this seems to be really the well for you.
Well, here's your war story. I would get the call from a lot of my friends and peers, be like, hey, can you take a look at this script? Right? Hey, can you take a look? Can you give me some feedback or whatever? And I'm really quick, and I've been accused of being really smart, but I think I'm just really quick at trial and error. I can figure things out, a little bit more quickly. And I had a friend of mine, we'd been drinking buddies for years at Chicago Dramatist, which was kind of a hotbed for, young playwrights that I got into. I don't know how I got into that when I moved to Chicago, but I did. And I didn't question their tastes. Hard Scramble the Play was actually one of my submission pieces, along with an Edgar Allan Poe play. So they're like, wow, Mamet and Tennessee Williams. This was crazy. He sends me this script that's like 160 pages. And I was like, what do you want? And he's like, it needs to be cut. And we don't know what to cut. So like in 36 hours, I cut, 50 pages out of it.
Man.
And my buddy calls me and he goes, dude, I don't know what you cut. Like, I'm reading this and I don't know what you cut. And so he gives me a call. He's like, hey, I'm working on a screenplay version of my big play, and would you be interested in adapting as a screenplay? And I'm like, hell yeah. And it was the story of Emmett Till. My buddy David Barr III had co-written an Emmett Till play with Emmett's mother, Mamie.
Oh wow.
And so we spent a lot of time working on that screenplay, and eventually we got it in the hands of somebody who got it in the hands of somebody that was well known in the industry, well respected. Asked if we'd be interested in writing it as a limited series. And we're like, hell yes, we would be interested in writing it as a limited series. And so I meet him in his office, and there are Peabody's in one corner, Emmys in another corner, and a statue of him, a little statuette of him as a stormtrooper, right? And we're just like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so we pitched the story to him. It goes amazingly well. My buddy flies out for a second meeting. It goes amazingly well. We're shaking hands. We're going to develop this together. We're going to target, the first wave of Apple TV programs. And Jaime, honestly, I swear to God, in my head, I literally thought, there is no way we can F this up. Famous last thoughts, right? And unfortunately, my buddy's father got sick, and he had to move back to the East Coast to take care of him. And we just couldn't find our rhythm. We couldn't get on track. And, after about 9 months, the opportunity just kind of faded away.
Yeah.
And, and of course, eventually the Till movie was made, which was great. But I'd worked on that project for probably about 10 years, right?
Oh, goodness.
With, adapting into a screenplay and, revising it, doing workshops and, and then being out here and, showing it around and meeting with people and taking meetings. And we had a Oscar-winning director attached at one point, and he tried to, shop it around, and nobody was interested. And you learn a lot about the industry, and somebody else attached to it, but used that to, leverage to get another movie, right? And then drop that one. So it's really it was it's kind of the opposite of the theater community experience that I had in Chicago. And I essentially watched 5 promising careers go down in flames, and I was like, that's it. I'm not working. I can't. I need a break from the industry and chasing this.
Yeah.
And I just decided I'm going to go back to writing novels. And I decided I was going to tackle this YA trilogy. It was more fun, Pixar style, and I was going to have fun doing it. It was going to be crazy characters and in a crazy world and a setup. And I was halfway through the second book when I had submitted The Fountain to this publisher that I'd gotten wind of from another friend of mine from grad school. And that's the thing with grad school is, like, I didn't learn anything more than I didn't already know in grad school, but I made great connections, and we all kept in contact.
Yeah. And
I'm with my publisher now because a friend of mine from grad school that I kept in contact, told me about them, and I got picked up by them. And a friend of mine that was a big fan of The Fountain back in grad school had been writing and not submitting for, the last few years. And I read her short stories and submitted them to my publisher on the slide, and she offered her a book contract right then.
Wow.
And she's like, these stories would have died in my drawer had you not done that. So the community and networking is so essential. But I decided I was going to be done with TV and film for a bit and pivoted back to, of course, I pivoted back to YA, and then all of a sudden my adult stuff started popping.
Yeah.
And The Fountain, right, got picked up, and then the pandemic hits, right? Like 9/11 all over again. There's always something, right? There's always something.
So many.
Bigger than you that you have no control over, and you just gotta, ride the wave. And then I had that moment where I thought, oh my God, Jaime, I don't have a follow-up to The Fountain because I've been working on this YA stuff. She might actually want to publish a second book. So in kind of a fever dream, I wrote Not Safe for Work, right?
Well, it's a good place to go here to specifically Not Safe for Work, because I was reading the premise of this. It sounds brutal. It sounds amazing. And I'd like to kind of dig a bit deeper into how this one came to be in that fever pitch kind of energy. What were the things that started coming together for you to come up with the semblance of a story in the beginning?
I don't think I haven't told this in anybody in the interviews. I was desperate for an idea. And I always feel like, at the core of any movie, if you want to write something singular and undeniable, you need to have a hook. You need to have a core idea that you can hang all your ideas on and entertain. It's got to be entertaining to some degree. And I was, like I said, I was in, a damn near panic of like, I don't have another book. So I started going through all my old files, and I found one way I'd shuffled some ideas. I had a little bit of a structure, and it was set in a bar where somebody declared they were going to kill themselves in 12 months time. And the guy sitting next to him, like, do you need help? And he's like, sure. So they agree to meet at this bar, once a month to kind of check in to see how things are going. And somebody, of course, overhears them and joins in, and so it was going to be a lot of bar stories, right, in there as well. So I could do a lot of different anecdotes about life and whatnot. And so I just started generating pages, right? I just started generating pages, my thoughts on relationships, social media, the state of things, because just started generating, a lot stuff about my own life experiences, and I got about 30,000 words in, which is novella length, and I'm still like, I'm not happy with the premise, but I know I'm at least writing and I'm generating pages. And these articles started popping up about social media moderators having PTSD. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And a friend of mine from Chicago, we'd seen a lot of live music, a ton of live music. And there was a shooting at a concert, and it wasn't in Chicago, it wasn't in the States. But she's like, had we been around, we would have gone to that show. And I just started thinking, oh my God, you're right. And, what would that look like? And so I realized with the social media moderator's job and the PTSD and how awful it was, I could use that job as a meet cute, right? And also all the things that I was kind of working through that were going, through the doom scrolling, right? The things that they would see, and how do you cope with that? And, and some of it's based on, people's anecdotes about doing that job, but also just, I want to take it a little further, satirically, but, you do that and it's funny until it's not. Right. And I mean, as we're approaching idiocracy and singularity, right?
At the same time, who would have thought?
Line of satire is gone.
Yeah.
So once I decided that would be the setting, it just sparked, and I cut half of what I'd written and, repurposed the other as I went through and wrote it. But then once I got that, I knew that was going to be the concept. I ran with it. And let me tell you, I'd written a first draft. I'd already pitched to my publisher. She was interested in it. And halfway through the rewrite, the pandemic hit. Now, the two characters in there, part of their coping mechanism is, and this isn't a spoiler, it happens early on, is they decide to get as far away from tech as possible. So they bring in sod, and they sod their apartment. They get rid of all the furniture. They don't wear their work clothes inside here. They have a Faraday cage for their devices. They bring in plants, they hang sheets, so they can create like basically a hothouse terrarium in Chicago in winter.
Oh, goodness.
And I hit a point where I can't escape the pandemic because I'm writing about two people that are isolating by choice. But now I'm in isolation. My family's in isolation writing this. And it took me a bit to kind of push through and finish the project. And I'm glad I did. But it's one of those things where there was no escaping. Is there no escaping escapism? For me, it was like, is there no escaping reality through the work?
Immediately, the reality caught up with your work, and suddenly I imagine it must have been a huge burden to bear creatively and emotionally. But it seems like you got out of COVID with a book.
Yeah, I got out of COVID with a book. My publisher made me an offer halfway through reading it. I'm super proud of that book. I feel like it was something that if I'd had the skill set, I would have written. I feel like it's really punk rock in some ways, modern punk rock. If that, that's an oxymoron, I guess. But I was really proud that I kind of went for it. And again, part of that was there was no time to rethink, is this, once the concept hooked.
Yeah.
And the response to the book has been, I wouldn't say it's been mixed, because the people that finish reading the book are like, this is amazing. I love this. It's got its own style. It's experimental in form, but addresses so many of the things, we're dealing with, school shootings, gun trauma. It's basically, how do you love in the age of trauma? Right. And that ended up being kind of the thematic thing of it. We get so desensitized to social media feeds and, people dying in war and all this other stuff. And it feels really helpless. Is like, how do you nurture, relationships in that kind of period? And it's also, the initial setup is you have these new temp social media moderators, that have to make it past their probationary period of 90 days to earn health benefits and a mystery bonus. So, then it talks about corporate abuse, because here you have people having to identify body parts for minimum wage, right? And what's the unrelenting, what's the effect of unrelenting, trauma that you're watching it and having to adjudicate this.
Right.
So, so that's where it ended up going. And I'm really proud, because I got, worked through a lot of things, I think, with it, or asked a lot of questions,
Yeah.
But for some people, the book is like, it's not for me. The trigger warning list is huge. One person in Scotland said, I didn't finish it. It was too angry. And I was like, well, we have different experiences in our different countries, and mad respect. I don't finish most books I start.
Sure.
But the ones that have finished it have been, it's resonated with them. And I was so proud of getting that Kirkus starred review. But it's like the quote on there, on the big pull quote on that was like, a potential cult classic. And you're like, well, I don't know what that's gonna, am I being damned to the underground, reader, all but demands a second read. And you're like, oh, who wants to read a book, twice, right? But I have had readers do that, and then that's been very rewarding and humbling. But so it's I've been going out and on the festival circuit and promoting it and doing readings and things like that, and it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun.
From the way that you describe it and the satirical elements of it, I know that there's something bold happening here in the way that you're trying to tackle this society that is so broken and so complex. It's a big ask, but at the same time, the reward of getting to the end of that book's got to be phenomenal.
Oh, it's I'm very pleased with how it came together, and but as I'm my own worst critic too. So while I'm promoting this book, in the back of my head, I got this voice going, this thing should be 10,000 words shorter. It should be 10,000 words shorter. I mean, you tried to find 10,000 words to cut, but you couldn't. Everything makes sense. Everything pays off. But it's like, this is supposed to be a shorter novel, and it's not, I mean, the book is thick because it's a slightly bigger font for, for Gen X's readability. Right. So it's only like, 80,000 words, which is, perfect novel.
Yeah. The reasonable size there.
And the thing with the fountain that has been interesting to watch. It's still selling, it's been out for over a year and a half now, and it's still selling well. And the premise of that is, and there's a point to me pitching you the premise of that, is that a drinking fountain in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago lets whoever drinks from it create a singular masterpiece, right? It's like fame, fortune, undeniable, right? But shortly thereafter, you may die. So it's, you have 4 clusters of artists, commercially successful artists like Ross Robar or Bob Ross. And you have, these legitimate, street artists that have been at the craft for a while, but haven't had their big break. And then you've got a critic who wants to be the arbiter of taste. Right. But he's also a failed playwright. So he's tempted to like drink the water, or he wants to champion the water. He wants to be a gatekeeper. He's still trying to figure it out. And it really kind of covers, art. I tackle art, with a capital A. Yeah. But it's interesting now that years later, that water is a stand-in for AI.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And now all those arguments of every artist, AI, and one of the people that drinks from it's, her argument is like, well, Johnny Cash, Michael Jackson, they all did drugs, they all drank, they used LSD. What's the difference? Right. Right. I just need the water just to get me over the edge, right? Because she creates a singular masterpiece, but then can't replicate it.
Yeah.
Right. And being pressured for the second piece. So anyway, it's interesting to see now that the magic realism has become a stand-in for AI.
It's a beautiful thing. I have a feeling that you're incisive about the way that you catch the pulse of what's to come. I think that's really enticing, at least the fountain for me. I mean, that's something that we could probably talk about for a little while, because it is so intriguing to consider AI, the way that it's just reshaping what the role of an artist is, or if they will become a quote unquote engineer, as they're calling themselves now on LinkedIn. Typically, you see those folks are like, I'm an AI engineer. I can make the art that you want.
Not Safe for Work was written, years ago. And there's a thing we're talking about, there's references to an old Soviet era sci-fi novel in there. And they're looking at a framed copy of the cover. Mm-hmm. And they're talking about, this is back in the day when they used to paint them, before there was, AI engineers. Mm. And, I did a lot of reading on I don't read a lot of mainstream news for research. Like I go to like Ars Technica, I read Wired, I try to read trade journals here and there to see what's coming down the line. Yeah. So, I've had people call me up. It's like, how did you anticipate X, Y, and Z in this book? Like you couldn't have had time to write this. And I was like, well, I'm not, by the time anything hits mainstream, as you know, it's old news. Right. The people in the field have been talking about it and screaming about it for years, right? If not decades. So it's just like, you just got to, know where to look and kind of, do your own spin on how you think things are going to happen. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, David, this has been phenomenal. I got one more question, to be mindful of your time here. And I really can't thank you enough for sharing the journey in particular about NSFW and the impact that's reading something like this will have on the way that we view the world, and maybe how we can keep our peace of mind in the insanity that's going on all around us.
Yes.
May I ask, actually, I'm going to ask you two questions. The first one being, what are you doing right now to maintain your quality of life, in terms of family, in terms of finding some kind of emotional health, given that we're getting bombarded with so much in this day and age?
The psychosis of social media and, constant bombardment of, different digital agendas and stuff is, what I've learned is you have to create your own parallel system within that system. And that is community. Mm-hmm. It is hands down community. Reaching out to people, checking on them, having conversations. This is, I was around when, text messaging cost you 10 cents a pop, right? And the joke with comedians there was like, why are we paying for more inefficient means of communication? Why is that happening? And, this younger generation, even, some people I know, like they get anxious if they see you make a phone call, right? Or they see somebody calling like, oh, I'm not ready. But that's when you actually communicate. That's when ideas are exchanged, because text messaging, sometimes you're just trading talking points. And, text messaging is great. It's like, hey, pick up an extra gallon of milk, or, hey, we're out of ice cream, while you're there, right? I mean, that's great. And that's important too. Beer and ice cream are absolutely important. But it's conversation and actually talking, sharing viewpoints in a constructive manner. And I think that's easier with my community because it's, writers that are in, film, TV, and playwrights, and they're seekers, right? And they're reading other stuff and they're trying to figure out how things make sense. But I think that's hands down, the most important thing, and, taking a bigger overview of it, of how things are going, knowing what you can control, not stressing out about the things you can't. And also, if you're a writer, spending time away from writing, filling the well, so to speak. And I think the best way to do that is with friends and colleagues that understand where you are. Because sometimes you find that connection better than you do with your family, depending on your background. A lot of creatives are, quote unquote orphans, right? But they find that, like you said earlier, like the tribe, you find your tribe, right? It all comes together in a community. And that's actually been the most rewarding thing for me with working with Whiskey Tit and Miette, the small press, is having a sense of community again with these small press writers, because I had that in Chicago in the theater scene there. So that's what I would say is like community and reaching out, actually having conversations with people and checking in and listening. We all have different fears and hopes and dreams, but they're often not that far apart from your own.
Oh my goodness. You know what? I'm going to save the other question for another time because we have just scratched the surface. David, I want to thank you so much for being just so invigorating in the way that you talk about the arts. And this has just been incredibly inspiring for me. And I feel super invigorated personally. Like, let's go get some stuff done.
Yeah.
But also, for not being as pretentious as your bio makes you sound, which is a great line in your bio.
Oh, you read the big bio.
Yeah.
The big bio.
For being a badass, for being honest about, some of these difficulties. And I can't wait to read the book, NSFW. I think it's going to be a blast. And I do hope that we get to keep scratching more than the surface and down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been great, and you asked great questions. It's a great interview, and like I said, I'm an open book. I don't try to gatekeep the experiences, and I have plenty of other war stories to share. And you're just like, oh, you think somebody's made it when you realize, like, yeah, we're all still struggling, even if it looks like somebody has had a bit of achievement. It's the end result is still really humbling. But I would love to come back and talk about The Fountain. I feel like that was a breakthrough in terms of writing for me.
Mm-hmm.
So it has a special place in my heart, and I've got some other fun stories about that one. But yeah, absolutely. And, and congratulations for doing your thing out in Wyoming and,
Thanks.
Up in your closet, but still reaching out to the world.
That's right. That's the only way to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially this day and age, right?
That's right. Well, thanks again, David, for everything. And I wish you the best. Happy writing. I'll be in touch really, really soon.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Jaime.
All right. Take care. Bye.